Thoreau and Einstein, Two Mystics Who Changed the World, a performance piece by Connie Baxter Marlow. Connie has accepted the mandate of her ancestors. If you see a better way to be in this world, it is your job to live it and share it. Connie is descended from the Baxters of Maine, the visionary philanthropists, politicians, and legislators who preserved Mount Katahdin for future generations, as well as from Mayflower pilgrims John and Priscilla Alden. Connie, a filmmaker and author, has spent the past 3 decades sharing her vision that humanity is about to make an evolutionary leap in consciousness to an understanding of the loving, interconnected, abundant nature of the universe. She foresees that humanity will align itself to this reality and subsequently choose to bring peace on earth in our lifetime. Albert Einstein and Henry David Thoreau deeply resonated to this possibility. She believes that Native American cosmology carries key pieces of knowledge that will help enable humanity to make this leap. She's produced a film series, The American Evolution, Voices of America, that weaves a tapestry of paradigm-shifting ideas featuring Thoreau as presented by Richard Smith, interpreter, impersonator, Bradley Pedine, PhD, Penobscot Indian elders, and other important thinkers. She has presented the performance piece, Thoreau the Futurist and the Emerging Human, around the country, delineating Thoreau's vision of the role of the Native American in the evolution of consciousness. Connie is co-author with Andrew Cameron Bailey, who is playing Einstein today, of the new book, The Trust Frequency, 10 Assumptions for a New Paradigm, that synthesizes indigenous cosmology, Eastern and Western wisdom, and quantum science, giving individuals the tools to move to a higher reality. Richard Smith, Thoreau impersonator interpreter, joins Connie and Andrew today for the talk show Mystics Alive and Well. This is a scholarly piece done in a light-hearted manner. All of the dialogue expressed by Einstein and Thoreau are direct quotations. Sources are noted. The underlying thesis of this presentation is that every human being is an embodiment of a larger force and has the capacity to connect with that force and, through personal choice, bring inspired action to pass in everyday life, ultimately transforming the world as we know it.
Thanks, Ron.
You're welcome.
Hi, welcome. I'm so glad that you could join us live in the studio today for my talk show, Mystics Alive and Well. I have 2 honored and revered guests here today, both of whom you have some familiarity with due to their inspiring lives and the gifts they brought us all. Henry David Thoreau and Dr. Albert Einstein. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Connie, and to each of you. It's good to be here, and I would remind everybody that this is the birthday of our friend Henry David Thoreau.
Yesterday.
Yes, I'm late. But then, we had to come by intergalactic transport.
And thank you for having me. Welcome to Concord.
Yes, well, we're happy to be in Concord. I have invited Dr. Einstein and Henry to join me today because it is my understanding that they both saw and experienced an expanded reality beyond that experienced by most of us. And this resonance informed how they responded to the issues of their times and how they lived day to day. They each stood up for what they believed in and stood out as exemplary people, sharing their insights and modeling a way of life outside of the norm of their times. First, I would like to define the word mystic to lay the foundation for the discussion today. The New Oxford American Dictionary states that a mystic is a person who believes in the spiritual apprehension of truths that are beyond the intellect. Thoreau called himself, as you all know, a mystic, a transcendentalist, and a natural philosopher to boot. Perhaps a definition of transcendentalism is appropriate here. Transcendentalism is an idealistic, philosophical, and social movement that developed in New England around 1836 in reaction to rationalism, influenced by Romanticism, Platonism, and Kantian philosophy. It taught that divinity pervades all nature and humanity. We think of mystics as ascetics who live in caves, drink only water, and ponder the beyond. We think of them as someone other than ourselves. I would like to introduce you to the everyday mystic, and to these two extraordinary everyday mystics who changed the world by applying their expanded vision to their choices as to how they lived and responded to the issues of their times. As an exercise, I would like to ask you to turn to the person next to you and look in his or her eyes and say after me, okay, everybody? I see a force greater than each of us when I look in your eyes. I acknowledge you as a unique aspect of that force. There. Now we are on common ground with each other, and with the two men we are going to experience today, Henry David Thoreau and Dr. Albert Einstein, two mystics who changed the world. Mystics, you ask? A pencil maker? A land surveyor? A patent clerk? A teacher? A recluse? A physicist? What was it that drove them to excel and to go down in history as game changers, along with a few others like Jesus, Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., John Lennon, notable activists who died untimely deaths because of the message they carried and the lives they lived? These people didn't remove themselves from the world. They stood up, spoke up, and shifted consciousness up a notch for eternity. They modeled their beliefs, their visions, and shared their insights. Henry, you have often been quoted as saying, if a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music which he hears, however measured or far away. The mystic hears a different drummer. He sees from a different point of view. He resonates to a different frequency. The station he is tuned to is sending messages of unity, freedom, peace, harmony, individual autonomy, service, and abundance. Those are the attributes of the world he knows is real and possible, regardless of the myriad of other stations and societies broadcasting the engaging and all too real seeming ideas of separation, scarcity, security, and servitude. I would like to propose that everyone has the capacity to tune in to the mystic's frequency. We can choose which station we turn the dial of our attention to. For some, it will come as a revelation or epiphany, a sudden aha moment, like the switching on of a light switch. For others, it will take years of practice and daily attention. Some are born with the awareness and spend their lives reconciling their inner and outer selves. Often, the mystical experience comes through crisis, deep loss, breaking the heart open. The challenge becomes, what do we do with it once it comes? Ignore it? Shove it deep inside where no one can see it? Put a mask over it and pretend it isn't there? Walk it, talk it, and become it, and in that way, change the world? Now, Henry and Dr. Einstein, tell us a little about how you first realized there was something greater than you at work in your lives.
A wonder of this kind I experienced as a child of 4 or 5 years when my father showed me a compass. That this needle behaved in such a determined way did not at all fit into the kind of occurrences that could find a place in the unconscious world of concepts. I can still remember, or at least believe I can remember, that this experience made a deep and lasting impression on me.
Methinks my present experience is nothing. My past experience is all. I think that no experience which I have today comes up to or is comparable with the true experience of my boyhood. And not only this is true, but as far back as I can remember, I have consciously referred to the experience of a previous state of existence. For life is a forgetting. Formerly, methought, nature developed as I developed and grew up with me. My life was ecstasy. In youth, before I lost any of my senses, I can remember that I was all alive and inhabited my body with inexpressible satisfaction. Both its weariness and its refreshment were sweet to me. This earth was the most glorious musical instrument, and I was audience to its strains. To have such sweet impressions made on us, such ecstasies begotten of the breezes, I can remember how I was astonished. I said to myself, and I said to others, there comes into my mind such an indescribable, infinite, all-absorbing, divine, heavenly pleasure, a sense of elevation and expansion, and I have naught to do with it. I perceive that I am dealt with by superior powers. This is a pleasure, a joy, an existence which I have not produced myself. I speak as a witness on the stand and tell what I have perceived. The morning and the evening were sweet to me, and I led a life aloof from society of men. I wondered if a mortal had ever known what I knew. I looked in books for some recognition of a kindred experience, but, strange to say, I found none. Indeed, I was slow to discover that other men had this experience, for it had been possible to read books and to associate with men on other grounds. The maker of me was improving me. When I detected this interference, I was profoundly moved. For years, I marched to a music in comparison with which the military music of the streets is noise and discord. I was daily intoxicated, and yet no man could call me intemperate. With all your science, can you tell me how it is and whence it is that light comes into the soul?
So you both had boyhood experiences, realizations that influenced the unfolding of your lives.
And then, at the age of 12, I experienced a second wonder of a totally different nature. In a little book dealing with Euclidean plane geometry, which came into my hands at the beginning of a school year, the assertions of geometry and lucidity and certainty made an indescribable impression upon me, and I began to see everything as geometric shapes.
I would like to point out to you, the audience, a few other parallels in your lives to set the stage for our discussions. Henry, you were an avid student, a voracious reader who studied philosophy and graduated from the nation's top school, Harvard University. You became a teacher, held a couple of mundane jobs as a pencil maker in your father's pencil business, where your research led to perfecting the Thoreau pencil, enabling it to become the best pencil in America. And you were a surveyor. You spent 2 years in a little house in the woods, not far from town, explored the wilderness in Maine and elsewhere, researched and befriended Native Americans, and documented your impressions in minute detail in your journals and books. You took a stand against war and racism, disassociated yourself from your government at an early age, went to bat for fellow dissidents, and spent a night in jail, which resulted in a world-changing solution for how a moral man might live in an immoral world through nonviolent non-cooperation. Every word you uttered, every move you made has become a model and inspiration for the generations that followed. Dr. Einstein, you were slow to talk as a child, but you too were an avid student, a voracious reader who studied philosophy, perhaps even some of the same philosophers as Henry. It seems that Immanuel Kant and other German philosophers influenced both you and the Transcendentalists. You attended top schools and became a teacher, held a mundane job as a patent clerk, explored a different wilderness of the mathematical nature of the universe, which you recorded in your papers and dissertations. You too took a stand against war and racism, gave up your German citizenship twice, once at an early age and again as an adult, supported fellow dissidents, and enlightened humanity with your insights into the workings of light, matter, and energy. You were both witnesses to extraordinary times in humanity's development. Henry, you watched reductionist science replace holistic experiential knowledge, where man became separate from a mechanical universe. You witnessed the abomination of slavery and a war in Mexico aimed at extending slavery, which you found unconscionable. Dr. Einstein, as a German Jew, you experienced the First World War, Hitler's rise to power, the Second World War, the Holocaust, with the loss of your family and friends, the invention and deployment of the atomic bomb as an indirect result of your theories, the onset of the nuclear age and the Cold War, with the threat of total annihilation of humanity. You brought science back from reductionism to an understanding of the warping of space-time relative to the observer, giving rise to quantum science, which has revolutionized man's perception of his place in an interconnected universe. You both seem to have been eternal optimists and spoke of universal higher laws and man's ability to interpret them and our potential to live in accordance with them as you watched humanity around you descend into lower, baser behaviors. It seems it was this ability to see higher truths that set you apart and has made your vision an inspiration to all that followed. Would you comment on this perception, please?
In the midst of this labyrinth, let us live a thread of life. We must act with so rapid and resistless a purpose in one direction that our vices will necessarily trail behind. The laws of the earth are for the feet or inferior man. The laws of heaven are for the head or superior man. The latter are the former sublimed and expanded, even as radii from the earth's center go on diverging into space. Happy the man who observes the heavenly and the terrestrial law in just proportion, whose every faculty, from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head, obeys the laws of its level, who neither stoops nor goes on tiptoe, but lives a balanced life acceptable to nature and to God.
There is a mystical drive in man to learn about his own existence. And how can he achieve this? Galileo showed the way by creating a system of thought that binds together observed facts. I believe that the dignity of man depends on his scrutinizing mind, his confidence in his intellect, his figuring things out for himself, and above all, his respect for the laws of creation. There is a pre-established harmony manifested in cosmic laws and related to our minds. You and I are individuals. Still, we are held together by a pattern. We all have living experiences infinitely patterned.
The laws of nature are science, but in an enlightened moment, they are mortality and modes of divine life. In a medium intellectual state, they are aesthetics.
You both seem to indicate that intuition or conscience is the avenue through which humanity accesses these higher laws and understandings of the nature of the universe.
Man has infinite dimensions and finds God in his conscience. The universe is rational, and man's highest destiny is to ponder it and co-create with its laws. There are only two limiting factors. First, that that what seems impenetrable to us is as important as what is cut and dried. And second, that our faculties are dull and can only comprehend wisdom and serene beauty in crude forms. But the heart of man, through intuition, leads us to greater understanding of ourselves and the universe. My intuition made me work. Many people think that the progress of the human race is based on experiences of an empirical, critical nature, but I say that true knowledge is to be had only through a philosophy of deduction, for it is intuition that improves the world, not just following the trodden path of thought. Indeed, it is not intellect, but intuition which advances humanity. Intuition tells man his purpose in this life. I agree with Young that causal methods in physics are not enough to explain the laws of the universe. My concept about relativity had to do with my feeling rather than my intellect. I felt that the universe is never static, but I sense, as the Greeks did, that all flows, I think, with intuition.
It is not the invitation which I hear, but which I feel, that I obey. If one listens to the faintest but constant suggestions of his genius, which are certainly true, he sees not to what extremes or even insanity it may lead him, and yet that way, as he grows more resolute and faithful, his road lies. The faintest assured objection which one healthy man feels will at length prevail over the arguments and customs of mankind. No man ever followed his genius till it misled him. Though the result were bodily weakness, yet perhaps no one can say that the consequences were to be regretted, for these were a life in conformity to higher principles. If the day and night are such that you greet them with joy, and life emits a fragrance like flowers and sweet-scented herbs, is more elastic, more starry, more immortal, that is your success. All nature is your congratulation, and you have cause momentarily to bless yourself. The greatest gains and values are farthest from being appreciated. We easily come to doubt if they exist. We soon forget them. They are the highest reality. Perhaps the facts most astounding and most real are never communicated by man to man. The true harvest of my daily life is somewhat as intangible and indescribable as the tints of morning or evening. It is the little stardust caught, a segment of the rainbow which I have clutched.
Did this understanding leave you feeling separate and alone in the sea of humanity?
The greatest tragedy in my life was the discovery that in moments of decision involving conscience, scientists and religious leaders made a compromise with the state for reasons of security. Now I am old, so known in the world, yet so lonely. Arrows of hate have been shot at me, but they have never hit me, because somehow they belong to another world with which I have no connection whatsoever.
Well, the government does not concern me much, and I shall bestow the fewest possible thoughts on it. It is not many moments that I live under a government, even in this world. If a man is thought-free, fancy-free, imagination-free, that which is not never for a long time appearing to be to him, unwise rulers or reformers cannot fatally interrupt you. How alone must our life be lived? We dwell on the seashore, and none between us and the sea. Men are my merry companions, my fellow pilgrims, who beguile the way, but leave me at the first turn in the road, for none are traveling one road so far as myself. The evil is not merely a stagnation of blood, but a stagnation of spirit. Of course, the mass of men, even the well-disposed but sluggish souls, who are ready to abet when their conscience or sympathies are reached, cannot conceive of a man who is actuated by higher motives than they are. Accordingly, they pronounce him insane, for they know that they could never act as he does as long as they are themselves.
You both went through the educational systems of your country and became teachers for a while. It must have been hard for you both, having a sense of a larger reality from a young age. What are your thoughts on the formal education of your countries?
School failed me, and I failed school. It bored me. The teachers behaved like Feldwebel, field sergeants. I wanted to learn what I wanted to know, but they wanted me to learn for the exam. What I hated most was the competitive system there, and especially sports. Because of this, I wasn't worth anything, and several times they suggested I leave. This was a Catholic school in Munich. I felt that my thirst for knowledge was being strangled by my teachers. Grades were their only measurement. How can a teacher understand youth with such a system? Man is what he thinks, not what he does. The basis of true thinking is intuition. This is what makes me abhor our present-day school system. They split each science into several categories, yet truth is only attained by a totality of experience. I was never attracted by specialization. I always wanted to know nature, creation itself. The mystery of life attracted me. My religion is to use my thinking faculties as much as I can to know what seems unknowable. Have you ever stopped to consider that reading books or gathering facts has never led to any scientific discovery? Intuition is the prime factor in our achievements.
What does education often do? It takes a straight cut ditch of a free meandering brook. Though bodily I've been a member of Harvard University, heart and soul, I have been far away among the scenes of my boyhood in Concord. Those hours that should have been devoted to study have been spent in scouring the woods and exploring the lakes and streams of my native village. Immured within the dark but classic walls of a Stoughton or a Hollis, my spirit yearned for the sympathy of my old and almost forgotten friend, nature.
This rebellious spirit continued into adulthood, and you both rebelled against your government and stood up to be counted during the turmoils and challenges of your times. Henry, you stopped paying your poll or voter's tax to the state of Massachusetts when you were 23 as a protest and spent a night in jail 6 years later in 1846. Can you tell us a bit about your motivations and the resulting essay that has since become a significant inspirational tool around the world and inspired the likes of Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, to acts of civil disobedience, peaceful non-cooperation?
How does it become a man to behave toward this American government today? I answer that he cannot without disgrace be associated with it. I cannot for an instant recognize that political organization as my government, which is the slave's government also. What shall we think of a government to which we all the truly brave and just men in the land are enemies, standing between it and those whom it oppresses? It is a government that pretends to be Christian and crucifies a million Christs every day. Under a government which imprisons any unjustly, the true place for a just man is also a prison. The proper place today, the only place which Massachusetts has provided for her freer and less desponding spirits, is in her prisons, to be put out and locked out of the state by her own act, as they have already put themselves out by their principles. It is there that the fugitive slave and the Mexican prisoner on parole and the Indian come to plead the wrongs of his race, and you should find them on that separate but more free and honorable ground, where the state places those who are not with her but against her, the only house in a slave state in which a free man can abide with honor. If any think that their influence would be lost there, and their voices no longer afflict the ear of the state, that they would be not as an enemy within its walls, they do not know by how much truth is stronger than error, nor how much more eloquently and effectively he can combat injustice who has experienced a little in his own person. Cast your whole vote, not a strip of paper merely, but your whole influence. A minority is powerless while it conforms to the majority. It is not even a minority then, but it is irresistible when it clogs by its whole weight. If the alternative is to keep all just men in prison or give up war and slavery, the state will not hesitate which to choose. If 1,000 men were not to pay their tax bills this year, that would be a violent and bloody measure, as it would be to pay them and enable the state to commit violence and shed innocent blood. This is, in fact, the definition of a peaceable revolution, if any such is possible. If the tax gatherer or any other public officer asks me, as one has done, "But what shall I do?" my answer is, if you really wish to do anything, resign your office. When the subject has refused allegiance and the officer has resigned his office, then the revolution is accomplished. But even suppose blood should flow. Is there not a sort of blood shed when the conscience is wounded? Through this wound, a man's real manhood and immortality flow out, and he bleeds to an everlasting death. I see this blood flowing even now. The mass of men serve the state thus, not as men mainly, but as machines with their bodies. They are the standing army and the militia, jailers, constables, etc. In most cases, there is no free exercise whatever of the judgment or of the moral sense. But they put themselves on a level with wood and earth and stones, and wooden men can perhaps be manufactured, well, that will serve the purpose just as well. Such command no more respect than men of straw or a lump of dirt. They have the same sort of worth only as horses and as dogs. Yet such as these even are commonly esteemed good citizens. Others, as most legislators, politicians, lawyers, ministers, and office holders, serve the state chiefly with their heads. And as they rarely make any moral distinctions, they are as likely to serve the devil without intending it as God. A very few, as heroes, patriots, martyrs, reformers in the great sense, as men, serve the state with their conscience also, and so necessarily resist it for the most part, and they are commonly treated as enemies by it. A wise man will only be as useful as a man, and will not submit to be clay, and stop a hole to keep the wind away, but leave that office to his dust at least.
Well, Henry, what sort of government do you see as a solution to this?
The authority of government, even such as I am willing to submit to, for I will cheerfully obey those who know and can do better than I, and in many things even those who neither know nor can do so well, is still an impure one. To be strictly just, it must have the sanction and consent of the governed. It can have no pure right over my person and property, but what I concede to it. The progress from an absolute to a limited monarchy, from a limited monarchy to a democracy, is a progress toward a true respect for the individual. Even the Chinese philosopher was wise enough to regard the individual as the basis of the empire. Is a democracy such as we know it the last improvement possible in government? Is it not possible to take a step further toward recognizing and organizing the rights of man? There will never be a really free and enlightened state until the state comes to recognize the individual as a higher and independent power, from which all its own power and authority are derived, and treats him accordingly. I please myself with imagining a state at least which can afford to be just to all men, and to treat the individual with respect as a neighbor, which even would not think it inconsistent with its own repose if a few were to live aloof from it, not meddling with it, nor embraced by it, who fulfilled the duties of neighbors and fellow men. A state which bore this kind of fruit and suffered it to drop off as fast as it ripened would prepare the way for a still more perfect and glorious state, which also I have imagined, but not yet seen anywhere. I heartily accept the motto, that government is best which governs least, and I should like to see it acted up to more rapidly and systematically. Carried out, it finally amounts to this, which also I believe, that government is best which governs not at all. And when men are prepared for it, that will be the kind of government which they will have. Government is at best but an expedient, but most governments are usually, and all governments are sometimes, inexpedient. The objections which have been brought against the standing army, and they are many and weighty, and deserve to prevail, may also at last be brought against the standing government. The standing army is only the arm of the standing government. The government itself, which is only the mode which the people have chosen to execute their will, is equally liable to be abused and perverted before the people can act through it. Witness the war in Mexico, the work of comparatively a few individuals using the standing government as their tool, for in the outset, the people would not have consented to such a measure.
Dr. Einstein, you gave up your German citizenship when you were 16 to avoid mandatory military service and became stateless for 5 years. You subsequently became a Swiss citizen for the rest of your life, with dual citizenship in Germany for a bit until you renounced it a second time and became an American citizen in 1933 when Hitler became Chancellor of the Third Reich and signed the Concordat with the Catholic Church. In your lifetime, you have experienced government out of control to the extreme, with the potential of total annihilation of life looming on the horizon, and have some definite ideas for a solution. In 1946, you wrote a public letter to the United Nations advocating the establishment of a world government. What is your vision of a world government? Can you share this with us?
When I was 16 and went to school in Switzerland, I tore up my German passport and became a Swiss citizen because a German is trained to obey the state rather than his conscience. My experience is that the moment man's mentality is bent on national goals and marching feet, it is corrupted and ready for even the most savage acts against humanity to justify its goals. I am interested only in living this life according to ethical laws, such as thou shalt not kill, which often contradict the laws of the state. I have let Hughes know that because of the mass murder which the Germans inflicted upon the German people, it is not possible for me to be associated in any way with any official German institution.
You mean the Jewish people, Albert?
Oh, did I say? Because of the, I apologize. It's just terrible having traveled all this way. I have let Hughes know that because of the mass murder which the Germans inflicted upon the Jewish people, it is not possible for me to be associated in any way with any official German institution. There is no security and peace unless we have a supranational government. We must liberate ourselves from what we have inherited of antisocial and destructive instincts. Disarmament and security are only to be had in combination. The one guarantee of security is an undertaking by all nations to give effect to the decisions of the international authority. We stand, therefore, at the parting of the ways. Whether we find a way of peace or continue along the old road of brute force, so unworthy of our civilization, depends on ourselves. On the one side, the freedom of the individual and the security of society beckon to us. On the other, slavery for the individual and the annihilation of our civilization threaten us. Our fate will be according to our deserts. We must change the history of states and nations, which is written with the blood of the masses who have had to obey the ruling few. No nation should ever try to get its security by building arms, but by adhering to democratic principles and supporting the creation of a world government, so that at last we will have peace and a new era for the history books. But it is most important to change our thinking, to change the heart of man. We must create a cosmic man, a man ruled by his conscience. Bargaining won't do it. Every one of us must have a pure mind and pure intentions. It's foolish to think that in the long run one nation can hide its research from the others. It is the highest wisdom to share scientific discoveries with all. There is no alternative to a world government and international control of the atomic bomb. Otherwise, we shall all be destroyed. We must attempt to create a supranational government so that no secrets are necessary. If we can only subdue man's evil spirit, we scientists won't change the hearts of other men by mechanisms, but by changing our own hearts and speaking bravely. We must be generous in sharing knowledge of the forces of nature, but only after establishing safeguards against abuse. We must realize we can't simultaneously plan for war and for peace. When we are clear in heart and mind, only then shall we find the courage to surmount this fear which haunts the world.
You were both pacifists at one time. Dr. Einstein, you went so far as to gamble your career by signing an anti-war petition at the height of World War I. And Henry, your thoughts expressed in civil disobedience ring of pacifism. Yet ultimately, you both acknowledge the need for violence in the face of unconscionable acts by your governments. Henry, you took a public and vocal stand for the radical abolitionist John Brown of Harper's Ferry fame, even though he committed some serious violent acts.
Captain Brown was a man of rare common sense and directness of speech, as of action. He was a transcendentalist above all, a man of ideas and principles. That was what distinguished him. Not yielding to a whim or transient impulse, but carrying out the purpose of a life. So universal and widely related is any transcendental moral greatness, and so nearly identical with greatness everywhere and in every age, as a pyramid contracts the nearer you approach its apex. That, when I look over my commonplace book of poetry, I find that the best of it is often applicable, in part or wholly, to the case of Captain John Brown. He was a superior man. He did not value his bodily life in comparison with ideal things. He did not recognize unjust human laws, but resisted them as he was bid. For once we are lifted out of the trivialness and dust of politics into the region of truth and manhood. No man in America has ever stood up so persistently and effectively for the dignity of human nature, knowing himself for a man and the equal of any and all governments. In that sense, he was the most American of us all. He needed no babbling lawyer making false issues to defend him. He was more than a match for all the judges that American voters or office holders of whatever grade could create. He could not have been tried by a jury of his peers because his peers do not exist. When a man stands up serenely against the condemnation and vengeance of mankind, rising above them literally by a whole body, even though he were of late the vilest murderer who has yet settled that matter with himself, the spectacle is a sublime one. Didn't ye know it, ye liberators, ye tribunes, ye republicans? And we become criminal in comparison.
And I am no longer an unconditional pacifist, but a realistic one. I am fully aware that I made many enemies when I changed my mind about pacifism. I displeased the Quakers, of course, as well as the followers of Bertrand Russell and of Gandhi. But principles are made for men, and not men for principles. I would be a traitor to my conscience if I allowed the world to fall into the hands of a dictatorial maniac who is bent to make Europe into one graveyard. I have experienced German boots, and woe to the country against which they march. I would be a coward if I preach pacifism while youth are taught to commit evil in the name of the state and to march to destroy me, my family, and other innocent people. In my opinion, the best method in this case regarding the pacifist problem is the violent one of conscientious objection, with the aid of organizations for giving moral and material support to the courageous, conscientious objectors in each country. In this way, we may succeed in making the problem of pacifism an acute one, a real struggle which attracts forceful natures. It is an illegal struggle, but a struggle for people's real rights against their governments, insofar as the latter demand criminal acts of the citizen.
So it seems you are both saying that one must act according to one's conscience, no matter what. And somehow you both see a time when humanity will collectively come from a higher place and bring peace and justice. You both hold on tenaciously to that vision or belief in the face of man's inhumanity to man being played out in the extreme, especially in your case, Dr. Einstein.
Of course, no one wants to listen to me. Yet as sure as I'm sitting here, we will be destroyed unless we create a cosmic conscience. And we have to begin to do that on an individual level with the youth that are the politicians of tomorrow. The Kaiser had tried to take over the conscience of his soldiers, And we remember that Hitler said some years later that he would be the conscience of the German people. But no one, and certainly no state, can take over the responsibility that the individual has to his conscience. I am a lonely man with these views. Something is disturbing me, and we owe this to science. Many of my colleagues don't see what is coming upon us, not just in America, but in the whole world, the mass destruction of humanity. Because men don't want to change their hearts. No, I'm not changing anything. Because men don't want to change their hearts. At the bottom of all problems stands the human animal with his greed. Nothing is so dangerous for a nation as to try to obtain military supremacy. Yet, this is the plan, both here in the United States and in Russia. I've said this many times before. The alliance between industry and the military will destroy us, especially when combined with the attempt to militarize the young by ignorant politicians who have forgotten that he who lives by the sword shall die by the sword. I believe in the free exchange of scientific achievements. Science and art are the only effective messengers for peace. They tear down national barriers. They are far better assurances of international understanding than treaties. Students of arts and science should realize that they are called upon to be citizens of the world. Create a community which develops the highest of men's qualities based on conscience. You must warn people not to make their intellect their God. The intellect knows methods, but it seldom knows values, and they come from feeling. If one doesn't play a part in the creative whole, he is not worth being called human. He has betrayed his true purpose. Science is never finished because the human mind uses only a small portion of its capacity, and man's exploration of his world is also limited. If we look at this tree outside, whose roots search beneath the pavement for water, or a flower which sends its sweet smell to the pollinating bees, or even to our own selves and the inner forces that drive us to act, we see that we all dance to a mysterious tune, and the piper who plays this melody from an inscrutable distance, whatever name we give him, creative force or God, escapes all book knowledge. It is a tragedy that men will die for a nation or a cause that is evil. How deaf and strong-willed they must be not to hear the voice of conscience, pleading for love of one's fellow man.
Our foes are in our midst and all about us. There is hardly a house but is divided against itself, for our foe is the all but universal woodenness of both heart and head, the want of vitality in man, which is the effect of our vice, and hence are begotten fear, superstition, bigotry, persecution, and slavery of all kinds. We are mere figureheads upon a bulk with livers in the place of our hearts. The curse is the worship of idols, which at length changes the worshiper into a stone image himself. We must learn to reawaken and keep ourselves awake, not by mechanical aids, but by an infinite expectation of the dawn, which does not forsake us even in our soundest sleep. I know of no more encouraging fact than the unquestionable ability of man to elevate his life by a conscious endeavor. It is something to be able to paint a particular picture or to carve a statue, and so to make a few objects beautiful. But it is far more glorious to carve and paint the very atmosphere and medium through which we look, which morally we can do. To affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts. The light of the sun is but the shadow of love. Love is the wind, the tide, the waves, the sunshine. Its power is incalculable. It is many horsepower. It never ceases. It never slacks. It can move the globe without a resting place. It can warm without fire. It can feed without meat. It can clothe without garments. It can shelter without roof. It can make a paradise within which will dispense with a paradise without. But though the wisest men in all ages have labored to publish this force, and every human heart is, sooner or later, more or less, made to feel it, yet how little it is actually applied to social ends. True, the power of love has been but meanly and sparingly applied as yet. It has patented only such machines as the almshouse, the hospital, and the Bible Society, while its infinite wind is still blowing, and blowing down these very structures too from time to time. Still less are we accumulating its power and preparing to act with greater energy at a future time. Shall we not contribute our shares to this enterprise then?
A new type of thinking is essential if mankind is to survive and move to higher levels. The cosmic man must be restored, the whole man who is made in the image and likeness of the arch force, which you may call God. This man thinks with his heart and not with party dogma. There is an order in the universe, a cosmic order, and humans have the possibility of understanding these laws. I'm not interested in what God looks like, but in how the world he created looks. I can read the thoughts of God from nature. The laws of creation interest me. I am part of infinity. My eternity is now. I have only one interest, to fulfill my purpose here where I am. This purpose is not given me by my parents or my surroundings. It is induced by some unknown factors. These factors make me a part of eternity. In this sense, I am a mystic, inspired by those unknown factors which mold our inner self.
To be a philosopher is not merely to have subtle thoughts, nor even to found a school, but so to love wisdom as to live according to its dictates, a life of simplicity, independence, magnanimity, and trust. It is to solve some of the problems of life, not only theoretically, but practically.
I don't say there's no heaven or hell, no God or devil, but these metaphysical attributes of reality have no interest for me. To me, it is heaven enough to serve mankind on earth.
It has been said that man without mysticism is a monster. It seems from our discussion that you would agree with this statement. I very much appreciate both of you for having agreed to come on this show. What are your thoughts on being called a mystic?
I am not a mystic. Trying to find out the laws of nature has nothing to do with mysticism, though in the face of creation I feel very humble. It is as if a spirit is manifest. It is as if a spirit is manifest infinitely superior to man's spirit. Through my pursuit in science, I have known cosmic religious feelings, but I don't care to be called a mystic.
I am a mystic, and a transcendentalist, and a natural philosopher to boot.
Darn it. I'm sorry to say we're out of time. There are so many subjects that we have not covered today. Your thoughts on science, primarily, something that has played a large role in both of your lives. We'll have to come together again to explore these matters. Tell me, if you had one thing to leave our audience with today, what would it be?
Let us spend one day as deliberately as nature, and not be thrown off the track by every nutshell and mosquito's wing that falls on the rails. Let us rise early and fast, or break fast, gently, and without perturbation. Let company come and let company go. Let the bells ring and the children cry, determined to make a day of it. Why should we knock under and go with the stream? If you stand right fronting and face to face to a fact, you will see the sun glimmer on both its surfaces, as if it were a scimitar, and feel its sweet edge dividing you through the heart and marrow, and so you will happily conclude your mortal career. Be it life or death, we crave only reality. To make a perfect man, the soul must be much like the body, not too unearthly, and the body like the soul. The one must not deny and oppress the other. You must live in the present, launch yourself on every wave, find your eternity in each moment. Fools stand on their island of opportunities and look toward the other land. There is no other land. There is no other life but this.
Rely on your intuition. Many ideas will occur, of course, but examine each of them critically. You have liberty of choice, but don't use it like a writer of fiction. Try rather to think you're solving a crossword puzzle and only one irreplaceable piece will fit. There are, for example, different systems of geometry to choose from, but there is only one equation which will fit your own sense experience. Aren't you in awe when you contemplate the mysteries of eternity, of life, of the marvelous structure behind reality? And this is the miracle of the human mind, to use its constructions, concepts, and formulas as tools to explain what man sees, feels, and touches. Try to comprehend a little more each day. Have holy curiosity.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. I'm so happy you could be here. And I think we'll open the discussion to the audience and see if anyone would like to have a chat with Henry and Dr. Einstein, or share with us some of your own experiences that may have given you insights into a larger reality. Anybody want to? Yes?
Yes, I have a question to Dr. Einstein. When you came back to United States, the United States government didn't really approve you about the atomic agreement with Russia. And my opinion is, did they ever talk to you about your opinion about that?
If I understand the question, it has to do with my actual immigration to the United States in 1933. When I came here, when I saw what was happening in Europe and saw the impossibility of, as a Jewish man, remaining in Europe, we had yet to understand what was really coming. But nevertheless, I saw it clearly and arrived in this country. Now, one of the interesting things that happened when I arrived here, the government welcomed me. I was a famous scientist. I could really contribute, as you all know, to the progress of this country. So I was regarded as a treasure, I think, by the United States government. However, I received a letter from certain ladies who shall remain unnamed, a well-known American organization of ladies, who wrote me a letter accusing me of astonishing things. I can't even remember them at this point. I mean, you have to realize that I died some time ago, and just simply making it back to this event, you know, we got this email, and they said you have to go. So, and one of my heroes, Henry, was going to be here. What could I do? So anyway, if you'd like to go and do a little research, you will find a letter that I wrote. It's in the public record. Where would it be? Where's the best place to find it? Anyway, there's a letter that I wrote to these wonderful ladies. They weren't the daughters of the American Revolution, but something like that. They were an exceedingly right-wing group of New England ladies who thought that I was coming here to utterly corrupt the morals of the country in one way or another. I wrote what I remember being a rather excellent letter back, but I don't remember the details.
I think you said something along the lines that your advance, you did it tongue-in-cheek, and that your advances had been of some concern to women in your past, and so anyway, I think that letter is in. There's a compilation of his letters in Einstein on Politics, edited by Rowe. I think you'll find it in there, but it's quite funny. Yes.
I'd like to update your issues to modern problems. Einstein, of course, addressed the issue of nuclear destruction when we had Russia and the United States, the major nuclear powers, and fortunately we made progress in cutting down the number of nuclear weapons and so forth and that. But I think the issue today is getting these weapons in the hands of terrorists. Like, what scares me is particularly the government of Pakistan, which is not particularly stable government, which has lots of nuclear weapons. So that's one modern issue, if you have any insights. The second, just to make things more interesting is the issue of global warming. And it all boils down to the use of fossil fuels. And we in the Western world, we in the United States, our use of fossil fuels and our carbon dioxide emissions are twice that of Europe and the rest of the developed world, and about 4 to 5 times that of China and the developing world. So I think the solution is the Henry Thoreau solution of living simply and not putting how much CO2, but how do we get everybody to do it?
So Henry, I think Dr. Einstein had a solution where he said that we have to change our thinking. The only way out is to change our thinking to a higher level. But here, you've got one.
Well, I find as you simplify your life, the laws of the universe become less complex. And poverty is not poverty, and weakness is not weakness. I was cultivating both poverty and solitude while living at Walden Pond, and I did very well at both. I find that the less I have, the less I have to worry about, and then I can concentrate on the important things in my life, such as God and nature, and being one with the universe. When I was experimenting in simplicity at Walden Pond, even if my house had burned down or my crops had failed, it would have been a simple matter just to replace them. I try not to become too attached to material things. It is a fool's paradise to think that you must be surrounded by large houses or many objects. You go into Concord and you see large homes that have whole warehouses of furniture. And I find, though, that when you go into Concord, the men do not really own the houses own the men. And I would want no part of that. I see no reason to be so poor that you have to sit on a pumpkin, but I see no reason why you have to have whole warehouses of furniture in rooms that you barely use. It makes no sense to me. Most men are so busy working 6 days a week, 14 hours a day, and trying to save up for a rainy day. Well, what if it never rains? So I find that the idea of working your whole life to save money so that you might purchase more and bigger and better is something that I want no part of. And I would like to see most of the people in the United States, and probably here in Concord, following the same sort of ideals.
Well said. Well said, Henry.
And
You obviously are not from Concord.
And to address the question a little more directly, our human behavior is resulting in some challenges. This is actually a good thing because it's becoming so extreme that we can no longer ignore it. That is actually a good thing because once we can no longer ignore the challenges, we must face them, we must look at them, and we must listen to me. Who has been a lonely man for a long time. I said that we must create the cosmic man, which of course includes the cosmic woman. We must elevate our consciousness. We must get over such things as nationalism. We must get over such things as greed. We must get over such things as fear. We must learn to trust each other. And I'm actually very unhappy with what has become of, for example, the United Nations, the visions that we had. The United Nations has, from my perspective, become very divided, just like it's all of a sudden it's a forum for all the differences and all the nationalities and all the different sects and divisions. We as humans must discover our unity. And the only way we can discover that unity is to learn to trust each other. And perhaps the only way we can learn to trust each other is to learn to trust ourselves.
I disagree with you in the sense that we must unite. I have very little faith in anything that masses of men can accomplish. I have great faith in the power of the individual. All it takes is one man to change the world. Look at Napoleon or look at Christ. It takes one man to be able to affect change. I am not particularly concerned about what my neighbors think. I am not particularly concerned about what my neighbors think of me. The only obligation I have to society is to do what I think right at any time. As long as I follow my own conscience and my own genius, which is a very crooked road, I still feel that I am doing what is right by myself. I would have nobody adopt my mode of living on any account. You are to follow your own path, not your neighbor's or your mother's or your father's. You must do what you think right at any time. By doing that, then you will affect change and change the world.
One thing, Albert, you've been well quoted as saying, no problem was ever solved in the same consciousness in which it was created. Do you think this applies to climate change?
Actually, I've modified that famous statement to I now state categorically no problem was ever solved. Because there was not a problem in the first place, you see. We saw it we perceived it as a problem. So if we go to one of our great wisdom keepers of the 20th century, Paramahansa Yogananda, who I had the great honor of knowing a little, Albert, he said, and I believe him, there are no problems. Do you remember that? There are no problems? What's the rest of the...
There are only solutions.
There are no problems, only solutions, no. There are no problems, only opportunities. So if we can change our perception, change the way we see what we currently call problems, and acknowledge them as challenges, yes, but say, wait, the problem, for example, of global warming, of climate change, if you read the book that Connie and I, in our other alter egos, have written called The Trust Frequency, look at the cover and you'll see that the foreword was written by a climate change specialist, Sally Ranney, and it specifically takes this perhaps rather esoteric book on the subject of changing one's consciousness and puts boots on the ground toward solving one of the, if not the most dire crisis we have yet faced. I mean, obviously, nuclear proliferation is a major question. Pollution is a major question. But the actual fact that we're changing our climate is going to affect absolutely every one of us. Nobody is going to be able to escape, not the 1%, not nobody, unless you're a really good swimmer. And the only way we can do this is to elevate our consciousness. So no problem was ever solved in the same consciousness in which it was created. And I have to say, looking back over the last, how long has it been, 80 years? There has been progress made. I was very pleased to see what happened in the 60s. I was very pleased to see that a chunk of an entire generation stepped forward and looked around and said, I don't think so.
And they started reading me.
And started reading this very obscure and difficult to read, but beautiful gentleman. Right. Yeah.
So, Henry and Albert, Dr. Einstein, thank you so much. And now, Richard and Andrew, welcome to...
Thank you for having us.
Mystics Alive and Well and our audience. And if you would like to have a discussion at all with the three of us on any of these subjects as ourselves, we're happy to engage. Otherwise, we appreciate your coming. And if you have anything else to offer. Do you have something to offer?
I want to talk to you.
You want to talk privately?
Thank you for coming.
Okay, thank you so much.